All right. How is everybody doing? I'm excited to be here today to talk to you guys about your keyword automation strategy in your Agile team. And so we're going to get started. My name is Lizette Zuno, and I will get to introduce myself a little bit more. Today's session, a couple of things we're going to cover is identify your keyword automation framework, determine what automation testing framework might be available for you to use, decide which test case to automate among your regression testing suite, determine if you are ready to introduce machine learning into your automation, and then talk about your return on investment. So a little bit about me. This is not a slide that I enjoy a lot, but I think it's important to know who is your speaker. I am an author, speaker, social entrepreneur. I wear many hats, and I'm also software quality leader. I think that's the hat that is most valuable here today. I'm also an Agile Scrum coach, and I'm a mom. And among the hat that I wear, the goal or the mission is always to provide confidence to the developer on the code that they're writing, and also to the end user on the application that is being delivered. And what I found is like trying to provide confidence to the end user and to the developer require you to have your own self-confidence. So I have a podcast where I talk about confidence a lot. So I'll ask you to check that out when you get a chance. And so we can get started. What I like to do in this kind of setting, since we have been remote, is I want to ask you to ask questions. I don't know if Kachi, you're going to be running the question because I don't see that right now, but let me see. Oh no, go back. But I will ask you to ask questions as they're coming. I don't like for you to wait. Ask a question. That way, as we go in the presentation, I can glean into the chat session and look for question and answer them. But definitely, I'll make sure that we have enough time at the end to cover question. All right. Okay. So for today's conversation, where we want to get started is everybody in your organization has probably discussed, keyword automation somehow, at least one, and this is a very daunting task if there's no clear direction, goal, or action. So that's where we want to start. So at least once you've already dealt with keyword automation, or you have talked about it and everybody want to do it, but how you want to do it. So let's get started. I want to know who do we have in the room and what everybody does. So I'm going to ask you, I like my presentation to be a little bit interactive so I get to know the audience, and then so we can have a little bit of conversation. This presentation reality is really well when you're in a room with a group and with your team member, but we're going to try to accommodate as much as possible in this virtual environment. So go to menti.com and use this code and let me know your role, so I have an idea of like who is in the room. And I'm going to pop over here to my Menti to see that as well. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to go to Mentis, and I'll give you a couple of seconds and give people opportunity to.
Let me bring this thing. Thank you. How much? For thank you. God bless you.
Please mute. Please, could you mute your phone if you're not speaking, please?
Is everybody able to use the menti.com and put the code in?
Yes.
Okay.
But the first question was possible solutions to consider for your team.
No, the first question is what is your role?
So now I have to go back and put that. 3, 2, 1, 1.
When the Menti comes up, that is the first question. That's why
the
responses.
Yes, that's the first question.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, so I see Scrum Master, I see Entrepreneur. Okay, fine. As long as I get the answer, I'm happy. Couple of more, and then we can get back to the presentation. So, okay, let me not get sidetracked. I'm going to go back. So I see that we have a couple of folks. Okay, so put in your code. All right, so I'll go back. The second question, if you want to take a look, is who is responsible for your QA automation? So let me figure out what's going on with Menti. It should be this slide now. Still right. Are you guys able to see the second question?
No, it's still going to the first one. We can just put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I'll read it out to you. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Not sure what's going on with my Menti.
So guys, you
yeah, so do as Godwin mentioned, put your answer. Who do you think is responsible for your keyword automation in the chat room? Then I'll get back to my presentation here. That's the reason why I try to do less interactive, because sometimes it can slow down the presentation, but
absolutely.
Those are the only two that I have, so. I'm not seeing anything. So if you want to read it out for me, that's good.
I hear QA team.
Okay. So who is responsible for QA automation? I think the only one answer kind of like hit it from the general knowledge that everybody think that's what it is. But the answer is simple. It's everyone in your delivery team, starting from QA, obviously. And then you have your business analyst, your product team, your designer, developer team, your DevOps, operation, and anybody that touched the application at any given point in the SDLC pipeline process is responsible for the QA automation. All right, and that's what I like to call total quality mindset. Everybody in the organization need to have a total quality mindset. All right, now let's list of pain point. I've been in software quality for 17 years, and for every of these, how many times I've heard it, I'll probably have enough money to live off of my favorite island, you know, and it's lack of acceptance criteria. So I'm going to list a couple of them here for us to just learn about. You probably have experienced this in your team. If I was in a normal room training, I'll ask you guys again to list your own pain point. Lack of acceptance criteria in your user story. Requirement are not well defined. User story are not well defined. QA is the bottleneck. That's what I hear all my career. Defect are not prioritized well. No visibility into the implementation detail. There's a lack of confidence in the development code quality. And there's a need for a stable environment for automation. I hear that a lot. And there's too much time that is spent on testing activity. So these are like pain points. And I like to say, nobody talk about automation when everything is going perfectly, because nobody really want to talk about automation unless there's really pain point that they have to deal with. So again, if I was doing this, I'll ask you, go to Menti and tell me a little about your pain point. So I will ask you, like Godwin suggested, to put it in the chat room. And then if you see some, you can read it out to me. That way I kind of know that you guys have the same issue that I probably hear, you know, in all my career, or maybe those are new issues that I haven't heard. Or if you don't have any pain point as well, I would love to work with your company, because that would be a lot of peace of mind, I'm sure. So what I usually ask a group of team, because this whole strategy exercise is really good to do it with your team, with your delivery team. And what I say is bring everybody to the table and look at the result. You know, this little chat here will help you with that. You can write your pain point, write who do you think is responsible for this specific pain point. You know, who do you think should be responsible in your mind, right? And when you guys get together, you will see that everybody has a different point of view of who should be responsible. And that's where even the crucial conversations start within the team, because maybe we pointing finger and say that should be product team. And then product team is like, that should be QA. So we need to all align on who is supposed to do what, and provide, you know, also your kind of solution, you know, because I'm of the mindset, whenever you provide a problem, you need to also give a solution in parallel.
Yeah, so Andrea said there's not enough QA persons. The whole thing was taxed with QA. And I think you put in there, sometimes there's no clear direction. So
no clear direction. Amen to that.
yeah.
Yes, that's always one that guides us.
Can I interject one point? What we found that worked with our Scrum team is that we had a separate meeting just to address QA issues. And what we had was one of the Scrum team members actually designed a roadmap that showed our process in details, because we didn't have it once we started developing the product. There was no clear path for QA. We just jumped in and we started developing a product. And so what we found is when we got more team members and we brought them on and we specifically tasked them to deal with QA, and they were going through the app and they were finding little glitches. And it may have been minor, but the fact that we didn't have a roadmap to say, well, this is where we have to actually put a pause on development and come back and fix these little glitches, it started to develop a huge backlog. And so we realized that we needed to pump the brakes and go back and address the whole process of QA, because that was overlooked from the start. And so that's some of the pain points that we found, that if we didn't address these, what we thought were minor glitches, that once the product leaves development and actually is released, then they would become major glitches, because that causes the product not to be as user-friendly as we would hope. And when you're designing a product, you don't really think about the user as much. You're developing it. And so having a better insight of QA kind of addresses those issues and helps us to now develop a better product before we release it to the market.
Yes, totally, Andrea. And I mean, that is really the entire journey that you have to walk as a QA leader in your organization. You know, it's the process that have to be put in place at the beginning, because the later it is, there's actually a graph, I don't have in this presentation, but there's a graph that I usually talk about. It's the later you wait for all those bugs to creep up on you later, there's a technical debt that you have to deal with, and it costs a lot more. So the sooner the better. So you hit it right on the nail, that it's the process, it's the roadmap, it's the strategy that you have to define. So thank you for that. All right, so one of the things you have to consider is really the trade-off, because the organization that you are in, everybody has different things that it's really important to them. So you have to understand the organization culture and the motivation of your stakeholder. You know, is it innovation? Is it trying to deliver value? That is the most important thing. Or is it cost saving? You know, I've been in an organization where all they just want to do is save money, save money, save money. So automation is something that they want to look into to save money. Now, before you do anything, I always like to talk about defining your why. I like this quote from Simon Sinek. It's those who start with why that has the ability to inspire those around them and find others who inspire them. What that means is you cannot do anything major, and automation is major. It's doing an automation transformation of your process, of your organization, of your team. It's major, so you have to have a vision. You need to have like a North Star that everybody can look up to, because it's going to get challenging. I know that for a fact. And the sooner you can have a vision, you can help your team buy into the vision and walk through that journey. So framework and tool. This is a slide where, oh my God, people want to spend a lot of time here. But my mindset when I'm talking about framework and tools, it's pretty simple. I'm really tool agnostic. I love any kind of tools as long as it works for you. It works for you. So there's two categories of tools that are out there. You have the codeless one and the script-based one. So you have to look, there's so many things that have to come into you making the decision as the leader. You have to determine the tool that work for your organization, team capability, and training need. Who do you have in your team? who are the people that are going to be doing this automation? So your tools need to be able to focus on the training that you're going to give to the folks and the capability that they already have, what they already have. That's the key word. Don't find a tool that now everybody's going to have to learn from the beginning. That's going to be a lot of challenge. And choose a framework that is easily integrated in your ecosystem. That's also great. And one of the things that I like to tell my client is, when you're looking at a tool and let's say there's 15 different features, right? See if you can match at least 10 of them right now and leave the next 5, because you want to grow into the tool that you're choosing. So this little top 5 question is something that I came up with as I'm presenting in these conferences. People really want to talk about, like, Lizette, how do I decide the tool? Give me the tool. What tool should I use? So 5 question is, find out what is your application. What are you trying to accomplish? What system do you already have in place? How is it going to integrate? Do you have CI/CD? Can that also do CI/CD? And what is your team capability and capacity? Leverage AI tool in your CI/CD. I have a whole presentation that I talk about just how you can use AI in automation. But I think it's important when you're talking about automation to think about intelligent testing. The intelligent testing is a whole mindset of how do you do testing with your team, but use a little bit of automation to help you make your job better and faster. Ability to use with AI tools, you can have better error detection from one environment to another. If any of you has been a QA for even 5 minutes, you know that what creeps into you is really the bug that works very well. That gets fixed in QA, but then when you go to the next environment staging, and God forbid in production, shows up again. And you don't want that. So having the ability to detect error from one environment to another is very crucial. Consistent execution of your test case is all environment. And when you working in CI/CD, that's also very important for what you're trying to do. You want to be able to test easily from one environment to another. So if you adopt or try to leverage an AI tool, that can help you with that as well. Now, this is another team activity that I'm going to talk about, but we're not going to do it because we have a very short time here. Things that you want to consider as your team member, and this is something you don't want to do by yourself, because I know somebody mentioned earlier, one of the pain points is you probably just have one QA person. That is fine. You, the one QA person, call everybody else in the room and you guys do this activity. Pretty simple things you want to consider. What application programming language do you have? Because you might not have the luxury of just have one application that you're trying to automate. You might have, like I did a couple of years ago, several applications that you're trying to automate. So you want to use a main tool that can service all this application. Is your application in the cloud or on premise? What are the security concerns? Because that's also can play a part in your decision. Is it front-end application or is it a back-end application? Do you have any database or warehouse involved? Those are all things you want to ask your team and make a decision on, and bring awareness to it. That's really what this activity is about. Possible solution, right? So once you find out, this is the pain point that I have, this is what my application look like, these are the different frameworks that are out there. Now, what are the solutions that your team can start looking at to adopt as part of your strategy? To start shifting left approach, and I can talk about this all day, but what is essentially mean is just for QA team not to just be a black box engineer no longer. It's really to start shifting left, to understand a little bit more about the code before you start doing testing. You have to set up training for your team member to become T-shaped, so they can be able to develop, deploy, and also demo. They can be really flexible and be a great team member and be helpful to the entire Agile team. You need to increase your testing coverage into non-functional area, because one of the things we find is team are just focusing on functional testing, and they don't spend time in other area like load testing, performance, accessibility testing, UAT. All of these are also important to give you the total coverage. And another thing that happens is like inclusive testing, right? Don't just focus on QA to be testing. Use anybody, whoever that can test. Actually, domain knowledge folks. I've worked in a company where sales, I'm one of my first job, if I recall, was testing a sales system, Salesforce. specifically configuration. So I go on the floor and get the sales guy and have them test on their own and see them testing. That's also provide a lot of value to us as QA folks. And then embrace that total quality mindset that I mentioned earlier. I'm not looking at the question, so if there's any question, sign to me and then I can stop and answer them. Other possible solution that you can look at, and these are a little bit internal to your team. Maybe you need better test strategy and planning, like Andrea was talking earlier. Maybe you need better level of effort estimate of those user story that you guys define, because not having better level of estimate creep up later into how you automate your tests, or even how long you take to test something. Define some metrics. I do a whole presentation on the different metrics that you look at, because something that you don't measure, you can track and you can improve on it. Define your KPIs, your quality KPIs, so this is what we're trying to hit, and as you move in, you can really achieve it. Define your sanity test cases. How many companies do I walk in and they don't even know what is the basic test case that they need? If something breaking, they need to test in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Define your sanity test case for all your application that you are responsible of, and reduce the blast rate and defect leakage. And there's a little anecdote story that I like to share is, as a QA person, you get traumatized so much from working with developer with low quality of code that it takes on average 18 months to recover from that. So imagine if you walk into a company and you've been there for 3 years, you spend 18 months just thinking, oh my God, this developer always give me bad code, and you're traumatized by that. And there's research around that. So reducing the blast rate, what happened in production, or leakage of defect will really help you to frame up better automation or strategy. Another activity that I do, I told you there's a lot of activity in this, but it's really important. I think when you get the slide, if you have a team and you feel like this is something that is important, work with your team with this, list the possible pain point that we talked about earlier, and then now all the possible solutions that I talk about, see the one that can help you to solve for it, or come up with your own, because you now have more visibility and awareness into what's happening.
So, yeah, there's a question here from Andrea. Said, can you elaborate on sanity test cases, blast rate, and defect leakage?
Reduce blast rate. So what I mean by that is when your bug creep up to you and come out in production. We don't want that. We really don't want that. And the blast rate is really how many bugs you find in production. There's a whole math that is behind that you can calculate, because the general idea is, I'm okay finding 100 bugs in QA for this release, right? In QA environment. And then the next environment, Sage, UAT, I find 30, but I don't want to find 50 bugs in production. So there's a certain number of bugs that I'm okay, because that's why I don't like the word, and you're never gonna see this in a presentation that I do, the zero defect. There's no such thing as zero defect, right? Defect is okay. It's part of just like, it's like part of breathing. Yeah. But reduce that number is very important, and reduce the quality of the bug that you find in production is important. So that's what I mean by reduce your defect, leakage, and blast rate. So. All right. So now let's talk about, thank you. Let's talk about adding automation to your definition of done. You guys are all Agilists. So when you start doing automation, it's like, okay, a QA person asks the team, how do I manage this whole adding my automation into the definition of done? And for me, this is what done means. Done means it's deployed, it's operational, it's not failing, and it's exactly what the customer wants. So that is my little definition for done. So if that is the definition, how do I ensure myself as a QA person and making sure that automation happens? You got to take an agreement with your team about your definition of done. Everybody needs to be aligned on the same page with that. you need to separate who does manual testing and who does automation. It cannot be the same person that is juggling those two. That is not going to happen. It's never happened, in my opinion, successfully. Maybe it can happen one sprint here, and the second sprint you're really struggling. So if you really want to be consistent, divide those into two or even more, but don't make it the same person so that they can have focus. Plan your manual testing ahead of the sprint, so that you already know the tests that you're gonna run manually. You can even write them ahead of time, and it gets run as they come available, the user story. But the automation engineer need to be the only one that is focusing on automation, so that they can write the automation as code get dropped. Developer also has a lot of responsibility in this. They need to be able to do daily code checking, so your automation can also run on a daily basis during the sprint, so you can have rapid result. All right, so in this slide, I'm talking about trend. What are the major trends that are still out there that you can maybe try to think about as your team, right? You can do the no-QA environment, but invest in heavy monitoring. Company like Google, Facebook, and Netflix, they do that a lot. You can use container Docker to test your code in a different environment before you deploy it. And that doesn't have to be your QA, but in a live UAT kind of environment. You can use bot or machine learning, like I was mentioned earlier, in the environment to alert you when there's a critical defect, that come through. You can review your product service that require testing. So do some really simple, easy testing as needed. All right. This is a slide that is that nobody really asks you about until it's really important. So what I asked my QA leader when I'm doing this presentation is get ahead and talk about the automation ROI, because nobody's gonna ask you about your ROI until you start automating. But it's good to start setting up everybody's mindset, like define your automation ROI to build a positive case for your transition, right? From your manual to QA automation. So define some metrics to consider for your ROI. It could be the number of user stories that get implemented. It could be the test case for each requirement, the percentage of test cases that need to be automated, or consider the test case complexity, because not all test cases are the same. You can also consider test case from prior requirement that is part of your regression testing. Consider also the number of configuration that is needed to be tested. So all of that are different things, different team, have different pain point, but think about these ahead and see how that's gonna impact the calculation of your ROI. Consider the capability and knowledge of each QA automation in your team, and in this presentation, I don't talk about training a lot because I'm not telling you about tools. So with tools come training. So consider the knowledge and training that you need to give your team, because what usually happens is we overlook that. We get excited about getting the tool, we get excited about let's start automating, and we forget about the human being that's going to do the job, what training they need. And last, define a baseline or how long it's going to take to execute your test case manually, so everybody know. And in another presentation, I walk into this whole case about I have 1,000 test cases that are manual. This is how long it take me 5 to 7 days for this one. I don't want to say not experienced, but just mid-size a QA person to run it. So they're not expert, they're not advanced, they're just, mid-size, they're not junior. And take them 5 to 7 days. So use that as your baseline. Don't use your most experienced QA person in the team as your baseline, because if they leave you, then your baseline is a change. And massive gaining according to your testing. So as part of that, it's your baseline is going to have your smoke, your sanity, and your manual testing, and do that in parallel to increase your ROI as well. So define your baseline. That's really important. Like, where are we? Because what I find out is people are in rush to, okay, we got to automate. And when you ask, like, where were we? What does the picture look like before we start automating? And nobody can tell you. So it's important to know, what does the picture look like today? and where are we trying to go in the future? That's how people will really see the value that you bring in with automation, because too many times I've seen a company where they get excited about automation and then things happen. Something happened because there was no strategy involved at the beginning. There's jump into it and it doesn't work. It's never gonna work. You know, it might work for 2 months and then 3 months down the road, everything fall down. So it's really important to define your baseline and know where you're starting. All right, somebody's trying to get it. So ROI for your team happiness, right? We never talk about in this conversation, at least when I'm in them, we never talk about the team, everybody, especially automation. Everybody's always talking about the number of test cases, the number of test coverage, the number of bugs, the number of issue, but we never talk about the people. And for me, I feel like what I've seen work is actually, there's an ROI for your team happiness, actually, because when things work very well, the team works well together, they're happy, there's better engagement, there's better collaboration, team collaboration, because we trust each other, there's better cross-functional team involvement. And most definitely QA become a fun activity and no longer a bottleneck, like I was mentioning at the beginning. So here's a summary, things that we have covered. It went back super fast. We talk about the pain point and your automation vision. We talk about the framework and tools, you know, how I'm really tool agnostic. I really think you have to think about your own environment and list and figure out all the different aspects of your environment before you jump into getting a tool. But even when you get a tools, make sure that your team has the training available so that they can get trained. And I talk about considering the latest trend out there and the possible solution and trying to see which one can work better for your environment. And last, we talk about the ROI and the return on investment for your team and happiness. So that will bring us to the end. Thank you so much.